All right, so one of the books of scripture we'd probably love to skip is Leviticus. It's got a ton of rules. And, today we're going to talk about why these rules matter. Set apart. That's what the word Leviticus means. Vayikra, and he called out. Those are the first words in Leviticus. This idea of being set apart is to be holy. And being holy is showing our love for God. Leviticus 10:10 through 11 shows off the main point of the book of Leviticus. You are to distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the unclean and the clean. And you are to teach the people of Israel all the statutes that the Lord has spoken to them by Moses. Israel got out of Egypt, and now it's learning what it means to be a people of God, not a people of Pharaoh. Not only was Israel leaving the cultic practices of Egypt, but they were going into the wilderness, where they were going to be among different people who had different cultic practices. Because of this, the nation of Israel needed to be set apart, or separated from these cultic practices. When scholars study the Torah, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, they discuss a method of writing called chiasms. A chiasm is a literary device written as a 1-2-3-2-1 pattern, where each section mirrors a later section, but the center section, the 3, contains the point of this chiasm. The center of the Torah is Leviticus, showing that the significance of the Torah is for God's people to be made holy and set apart. Right before Leviticus is Exodus, where we found salvation for the enslaved Israelites. They were under the horrible reign of Egypt, and God freed them. So their act of being holy or set apart was their response to the salvation that God brought for them. Just as our acts of being holy is our response to the gospel news. So first comes the salvation, and then comes the laws to help us be holy in order to show our love for God. This idea of being set apart is incredibly important, but we must remember that does not give Christians an excuse to be separated from the world. The mission that God gave us is to reach the unreached, not to be a self-righteous people on a hill. So Leviticus goes through 2 levels of holiness. First is priestly holiness. Give you an example. Do you want to use silverware that was cleaned with soap or someone else's mouth? The priest's job was to help people with their sacrifices and to educate them on the Torah. These sacrifices were intended to cleanse people of their sins. And so the people conducting their sacrifices needed to have godly lives. Otherwise, it was like cleansing people with their mouth instead of with soap. Because of this, they were given much more intense rules about what they could wear, who they could marry, and what they could do. The second level of holiness was Israel's. Going back to that example, what would you prefer to eat with? A spoon that was cleaned with someone else's mouth, or a spoon that was cleaned with soap? Israel is God's people. They're intended to do His work and to be a blessing to all other nations. Because of this, they were given specific patterns to help keep them separated from the other spoons. This didn't invalidate the other spoons, but rather it prepared the clean ones for immediate use. The other spoons can still be cleaned. Being unclean does not mean immoral or sinful. It was unclean to touch the dead, but it wasn't sinful to bury them. It was unclean for a woman to have her time of the month, but it was not sinful. But doing rituals that were reserved for being clean, that would have been breaking the covenant that they had with God. And breaking that covenant was sin. So there were 2 ways that Israel was to be set apart or holy. The first was that they did not follow the ways of the surrounding cultic behaviors. This included eating red meat in Leviticus 17:12, which said, "Therefore I have said to the people of Israel, no person among you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger who sojourns among you eat blood." We have later passages explaining how this applied to their covenant with God in their context then, and does not hold the same weight now. Like how Jesus declared all foods clean in Mark 7. Don't you see that whatever goes into someone from the outside doesn't make them unclean? It doesn't go into the heart, it only goes into the stomach, and then it carries on, out the drain. And in Acts 10:13 through 15, we see how Peter had a vision declaring all food clean for a second time. And then other cultic behaviors of that time were cutting your hair, getting pierced ears, or even tattoos in Leviticus 19:27 through 28, which says, "You shall not round off the hair on your temples or mar the edges of your beard. You shall not make any cuts on your body for the dead or tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord. So you might think that a guy with tattoos was just telling you how tattoos were occult behavior. Or maybe you might be regretting shaving your middle school mustache or recently having a steak. Let's be clear, this was written to a time and a people. When we read this scripture, we must understand that the context and the intent of what was written matters. Leviticus 19:27 and 28 says not to shave their heads, cut their bodies, or tattoo themselves in worship of the dead. The Canaanite nation would pierce their bodies as a funeral practice. This is not what God wanted for Israel or what he wants from us today. We are not surrounded by these same cultic practices anymore. It's still probably safe to say not to do things in worship of the dead, but getting tattoos or pierced ears is not associated with worship of the dead anymore. It looks different to be set apart today than it did then. Jesus showed how being radically generous, compassionate, and loving to the outside world is the Christian call today. We should separate ourselves by how we outdo each other in showing honor. On more significant levels, it continues to say that Israel should separate themselves by not selling their children into prostitution, having any part of bestiality, or child sacrifice. And to be clear, these things still apply today. So no, you cannot give your little brother up as a sacrifice. This leads to another significant way that Israel was meant to be set apart, through their justice. First, we need to explain justice in the biblical sense. In our modern context, justice looks like punishing someone for what they have done. The Bible explains justice as righting what is wrong, to make just what has happened, which looks like freeing the oppressed in Isaiah 1:17, or caring for the needy in Proverbs, and giving grace to the unworthy in John 3:17. These ideas of justice set Israel apart from the nations around them. Even for those on the wrong side of justice, hope is found in Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. This is the day where all debts are forgiven, all sins are no more. But, as Paul says in Romans 6, shall we keep on sinning? By no means. Atonement isn't an excuse to renew behaviors, but a path to changing them. The grace we are given should be the catalyst for our life change. So the laws in Leviticus are about how we are to be set apart or made holy. How does that look in your life now?